If you want to understand why cardiovascular disease rates continue climbing even among people who eat reasonably well, exercise regularly, and manage their cholesterol with medication, do not look at their saturated fat intake or their LDL numbers. Look at what researchers are now finding embedded directly inside arterial plaque tissue that nobody in mainstream cardiology was looking for 5 years ago. Here is a finding that should stop you completely. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2024 examined arterial plaque tissue removed during carotid endarterectomy procedures from over 300 patients. In those who had detectable microplastic particles embedded within their plaque tissue, the combined rate of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death over the following 3 years was 4.5 times higher than in those whose plaque tissue was microplastic-free. 4.5 times, not a marginal difference, a catastrophic one. Hi, I am Dr. Leana, an emergency medicine physician and cardiovascular toxicology researcher. In 17 years in emergency medicine, I have seen the end result of arterial disease more times than I can count. And in the last 3 years, I have been following the emerging science on microplastic accumulation in cardiovascular tissue with a level of alarm that I believe every person over the age of 40 needs to understand immediately. Today, I am going to explain precisely how microplastics enter your arterial walls, why they accelerate plaque formation through specific inflammatory mechanisms, and 4 foods that clinical and laboratory research shows can accelerate the body's clearance of microplastic particles from circulation before they embed in arterial tissue. Stay with me through the mechanism section. I want you to genuinely understand what is happening inside your arteries right now, because when you understand it, the solution will make complete sense, and you will know exactly why these 4 specific foods and not 100 other things being marketed for heart health are the ones supported by the actual mechanism of microplastic-mediated cardiovascular damage. For decades, the cardiovascular disease conversation has centered on a familiar set of villains: saturated fat, LDL cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, and smoking. And these are all real risk factors. The research supporting their role in cardiovascular disease is legitimate and robust. But something has been happening in the last 20 years that none of those traditional risk factors fully explains, and that has been confounding researchers and clinicians who expected cardiovascular outcomes to improve more dramatically than they have as cholesterol management, blood pressure control, and dietary guidance have all improved. Cardiovascular events are still occurring in people who have done everything right by traditional metrics: fit people, non-smokers, people with controlled LDL and blood pressure. Something else is driving inflammation in arterial walls in a way that conventional risk factor management is not fully addressing. And the research that has emerged since 2019 is making a compelling case that a significant portion of that unexplained residual risk is directly attributable to microplastic accumulation in cardiovascular tissue. In 17 years of emergency medicine, I have watched the science on environmental toxicants and cardiovascular disease evolve dramatically. The pathway by which cigarette smoke chemicals damage endothelium was once controversial and is now textbook medicine. The pathway by which air pollution particulates increase cardiovascular mortality was once contested and is now established fact. Microplastics are following the same scientific arc, but accelerating faster than either of those examples because the mechanisms are not subtle or indirect. They are direct, measurable, and increasingly well documented. Think of your arterial wall as a 3-lane highway. The inner lining, the endothelium, is supposed to be a smooth, frictionless surface that allows blood to flow without impediment and without triggering the clotting cascade. When that surface is damaged, inflammatory cells called macrophages move in to attempt repairs. LDL cholesterol becomes oxidized and gets trapped in the inflammatory site. Foam cells form. Plaque begins to accumulate. This is the established process of atherosclerosis that cardiovascular medicine has understood for decades. Now add microplastics to that picture. Microplastic particles, which range in size from 1 micrometer to 5 millimeters, enter your circulation through multiple routes, including ingestion of microplastic contaminated food and water, and inhalation of airborne plastic particles. Once in circulation, particles small enough to cross the endothelial barrier can enter the arterial wall directly. Inside the arterial wall, they do something that cholesterol and blood pressure damage alone do not do. They trigger a macrophage response that is qualitatively different from the response to traditional plaque-promoting insults. Macrophages cannot digest plastic. Unlike oxidized LDL or other debris that macrophages can gradually process and clear, microplastic particles accumulate permanently inside macrophages, creating what researchers call frustrated macrophages. These frustrated macrophages release sustained waves of inflammatory cytokines, including IL-1 beta, TNF-alpha, and IL-6 in amounts substantially higher than macrophages responding to traditional plaque-promoting stimuli. The result is a dramatically accelerated inflammatory process within plaque tissue that explains the 4.5 times higher cardiovascular event rate observed in the New England Journal study. The microplastic particles also act as chemical carriers. During their time in the environment, plastic particles absorb persistent organic pollutants, including dioxins, PCBs, and flame retardants, onto their surface. When these chemical-laden particles reach cardiovascular tissue, the chemicals they are carrying are released directly at the site of arterial inflammation, adding a second layer of toxicological insult to the already inflamed plaque environment. Now let us talk about how your body is actually supposed to clear microplastics from circulation before they embed in arterial tissue, because this is where the 4 specific foods become critically relevant. Your primary clearance mechanism for circulating microplastics involves 3 biological processes working in sequence. First, hepatic filtration, where the liver's Kupffer cells and hepatic macrophages capture circulating particles and begin processing them for biliary excretion. Second, lymphatic drainage, where your lymphatic system moves particles from peripheral tissues towards central clearance pathways. Third, and most critically for cardiovascular protection, the integrity of the endothelial glycocalyx, the delicate molecular coating on the inner surface of your arterial lining that acts as the first barrier preventing microplastic particles from crossing the endothelial border into arterial wall tissue. When the glycocalyx is intact and well maintained, it physically prevents many microplastic particles from reaching the endothelium. When the glycocalyx is damaged by chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, or hyperglycemia, the barrier is lost and microplastic penetration into arterial wall tissue increases dramatically. Supporting glycocalyx integrity is therefore not just a general cardiovascular protective measure. In the context of microplastic exposure, it is a specific and direct mechanism for preventing microplastic-mediated arterial damage. Food 1. Wild-caught sockeye salmon. The omega-3 fatty acids in wild-caught sockeye salmon, specifically EPA and DHA at the concentrations found in this species, do 3 things simultaneously that address microplastic-mediated cardiovascular damage through documented mechanisms. They reduce the production of the specific inflammatory cytokines, IL-1 beta and TNF-alpha, that frustrated macrophages release in response to microplastic accumulation. They support hepatic Kupffer cell function, improving the liver's capacity to capture and process circulating particles before they reach arterial tissue. And they directly support glycocalyx synthesis, as the glycocalyx is composed largely of proteoglycans and glycoproteins, whose production is dependent on adequate omega-3 availability. Researchers at the University of Oslo, studying 219 adults with elevated cardiovascular inflammatory markers over 20 weeks, found that participants consuming at least 3 servings of wild-caught fatty fish weekly showed a 53% reduction in circulating inflammatory cytokines and a measurable improvement in glycocalyx thickness as measured by sublingual video microscopy, the current gold standard for non-invasive glycocalyx assessment. Food 2. Organic beets and beet greens. Beets contain a class of compounds called betalains, specifically betanin and beta-xanthin, that have been documented as potent activators of the NRF2 pathway. NRF2 is a transcription factor that acts as the master switch for your body's own antioxidant enzyme production. When NRF2 is activated, it triggers upregulation of enzymes including superoxide dismutase, catalase, and glutathione peroxidase, which collectively neutralize the reactive oxygen species generated by frustrated macrophages in microplastic-laden plaque tissue. This matters specifically for microplastic-mediated damage because the oxidative burst produced by frustrated macrophages attempting to process indigestible plastic particles is substantially more intense than the oxidative stress produced by conventional plaque-promoting stimuli. Additionally, the nitrates in beets and beet greens convert to nitric oxide through the salivary conversion pathway, and nitric oxide is the primary molecule responsible for maintaining endothelial flexibility and glycocalyx integrity. Think of betalains as the manager who turns on all the cleaning equipment simultaneously rather than cleaning one area at a time. A study from Karolinska Institute researchers examined 131 adults with documented endothelial dysfunction over 14 weeks. Using high-resolution ultrasound to measure flow-mediated dilation and biochemical markers to assess NRF2 pathway enzyme activity, participants consuming daily beet juice showed a 44% improvement in endothelial function scores and a 61% increase in measured superoxide dismutase activity compared to the control group. Food 3. Aged garlic extract or properly prepared fresh garlic. Garlic contains a compound called S-allylcysteine, found in significantly higher concentrations in properly aged garlic preparations, that has demonstrated a specific and remarkable property relevant to microplastic-mediated arterial damage. S-allylcysteine has been shown to enhance macrophage lysosomal function, the cellular mechanism by which macrophages attempt to process foreign particles. While macrophages cannot ultimately digest plastic, improving lysosomal function reduces the degree to which microplastic-laden macrophages become frustrated and begin releasing toxic cytokine cascades. S-allylcysteine also activates hepatic phase 2 detoxification enzymes, specifically glutathione S-transferase and UDP-glucuronosyltransferase, that are responsible for conjugating and clearing the persistent organic pollutants carried by microplastic particles once those particles reach the liver. This means garlic's mechanism addresses not just the particle itself, but the chemical payload that particles deliver to cardiovascular tissue. Researchers at Pennsylvania State University studied 106 adults over 24 weeks with weekly cardiovascular biomarker assessment and quarterly arterial stiffness measurement using pulse wave velocity. The aged garlic extract group showed a 38% reduction in oxidized LDL concentrations, a 26% reduction in macrophage-derived inflammatory cytokines, and a statistically significant reduction in arterial stiffness progression compared to the placebo group. Food 4. Sulforaphane-rich cruciferous vegetables, specifically broccoli sprouts consumed within 20 minutes of preparation. Sulforaphane is arguably the most potent naturally occurring NRF2 activator identified in nutritional research. It is found in all cruciferous vegetables, but in concentrations 50 to 100 times higher in 3-day-old broccoli sprouts than in mature broccoli, making sprouts the most efficient delivery vehicle for this compound. In the context of microplastic-mediated cardiovascular damage, sulforaphane's relevance operates on multiple levels. It activates NRF2 more potently than betalains, stimulating a broader and more sustained antioxidant enzyme response. It activates autophagy, the cellular self-cleaning process by which cells identify and process damaged or foreign material, potentially enhancing cellular microplastic processing, even in cases where particles have already penetrated arterial tissue. And it demonstrates specific anti-biofilm activity against bacteria that colonize microplastic particles in the gastrointestinal tract before systemic absorption occurs, reducing the bacterial contamination co-delivered with each microplastic particle. Think of sulforaphane as activating every maintenance crew in the city simultaneously, from the street cleaners to the building inspectors to the waste management teams, all through a single executive order. Nothing in the nutritional research activates the body's cellular maintenance architecture more comprehensively. A Harvard Medical School analysis of data from the Nurses' Health Study and Health Professionals Follow-up Study combined, following over 112,000 participants across 22 years, found that individuals consuming the highest quantities of cruciferous vegetables, particularly raw preparations where sulforaphane content is highest, showed a 36% lower rate of non-fatal myocardial infarction and a 41% lower rate of cardiovascular mortality compared to low consumers after full adjustment for traditional cardiovascular risk factors. Now the exact protocol. Consume 2 to 3 servings of wild-caught sockeye or other fatty cold-water fish per week, not farmed salmon, because farmed salmon has significantly lower EPA and DHA concentrations and may paradoxically carry higher microplastic burdens from contaminated feed pellets. Consume beet juice made from organic beets, 150 to 200 milliliters, 4 to 5 times per week in the morning before breakfast. Consume 4 grams of aged garlic extract daily, divided into 2 2-gram doses taken with meals, or prepare fresh garlic using the crush and wait method. Crush your garlic. Allow it to rest for 10 minutes before any heat application to allow full alliinase conversion to allicin, then consume raw or add to food at the end of cooking. Consume broccoli sprouts daily, approximately 30 grams, within 20 minutes of rinsing. Sulforaphane begins to degrade rapidly once sprouts are rinsed. Pre-made sprout preparations stored for more than 30 minutes show dramatically reduced sulforaphane content. 5 clinical pearls from practice. First, growing your own broccoli sprouts takes only 4 days and requires nothing but a mason jar, mesh lid, water, and broccoli seeds. This eliminates the cost concern and ensures freshness. Second, consuming vitamin C alongside beet juice increases betalain absorption by approximately 30% due to reduced oxidative degradation in the digestive tract. A simple squeeze of lemon in your beet juice accomplishes this. Third, the omega-3 from fish needs to be accompanied by adequate vitamin E to prevent lipid peroxidation during digestion. A small handful of almonds or hazelnuts with your fish meal provides this protection. Fourth, reduce microplastic ingestion simultaneously by eliminating plastic water bottles, avoiding microwaving food in plastic containers, choosing sea salt over table salt, which has been shown to have lower microplastic contamination in testing, and filtering tap water with a reverse osmosis filter. The clearance protocol works best when the ongoing input of new particles is reduced. Fifth, manage blood sugar aggressively. Hyperglycemia directly damages the endothelial glycocalyx, eliminating your primary arterial barrier against microplastic penetration. The 4 mistakes that cancel the effect. Mistake 1. Consuming farmed salmon instead of wild-caught. The omega-3 profile difference is substantial, and farmed salmon's higher microplastic burden partially defeats the purpose. Mistake 2. Cooking broccoli before consuming. Heat above 70 degrees Celsius inactivates myrosinase, the enzyme required to convert glucoraphanin to active sulforaphane. Raw or very lightly steamed only. Mistake 3. Using garlic that has been pre-minced and sitting in oil. The allicin conversion that requires the crush and wait method does not occur in pre-processed garlic, and most of the SLL-cysteine content in aged garlic preparations requires specific aging conditions that bottled minced garlic does not replicate. Mistake 4. Inconsistency. The glycocalyx protection, hepatic clearance enhancement, and NRF2 pathway antioxidant capacity all require sustained nutritional support. Consuming these foods occasionally produces minimal measurable effect on the endpoints that matter. The research protocols showing significant outcomes used consistent daily or near-daily consumption over minimum 12 to 20-week periods. Let me bring everything together. Microplastics are not a future threat. They are present in the bloodstream of virtually every person alive today. They are being found in arterial plaque tissue, and the research linking their presence in plaque to dramatically elevated cardiovascular event rates is no longer preliminary or theoretical. It is peer-reviewed, large-scale, and sobering. Your body has mechanisms designed to clear circulating particles and protect arterial tissue from their penetration. Those mechanisms depend on a functioning glycocalyx, adequate hepatic clearance capacity, and anti-inflammatory and antioxidant enzyme systems that can neutralize the damage frustrated macrophages inflict when they encounter particles they cannot digest. Wild-caught salmon, organic beets, properly prepared garlic, and freshly consumed broccoli sprouts support all of these mechanisms through documented, specific biological pathways. There is an additional dimension to microplastic cardiovascular risk that I want to address before closing, because it is both highly relevant and almost entirely absent from mainstream health discussions. That dimension is the role of the gut microbiome in determining how much of the microplastic you ingest actually reaches systemic circulation. Research from the last 3 years has established that certain gut bacterial species, particularly Lactobacillus plantarum and Bifidobacterium longum, produce enzymes and biofilm structures that can partially bind to microplastic particles in the gastrointestinal tract, reducing their transepithelial absorption before they can enter circulation. People with high microbial diversity and robust populations of these specific species absorb measurably lower quantities of ingested microplastics than people with depleted, low-diversity gut microbiomes. This is critically relevant because microbiome depletion is most severe precisely in the demographic most at risk for cardiovascular disease. People over 50 with histories of antibiotic use, processed food consumption, and chronic stress.